everybody. We asked a rather interesting question to the speakers of this morning. If you would reincarnate 2,000 years from now, what do you think you would recollect from HPB's ideas? So this morning we're going to talk about how we can keep her ideas alive. We're going to do a workshop together about how we can be teachers in the footsteps of HPB. And it's my pleasure to announce the first speaker who said when being asked, what is Theosophy to you? It's a basic pillar of my survival. She's a very active blogger and writer and also the General Secretary of the Belgian section of the TS Ajar. Her name is Sabine van Osta.
Good morning, friends. First of all, I want to thank the board of the ITC for inviting me to come and speak to you. I'm very honored, I'm very pleased, and I'm very pleased to be with all of you. I'm having the time of my life, and I hope so do you. Actually, as Marijn said, the question was, what would we recollect from HPB's teachings from here 2,000 years ahead? I prefer to remain a bit more concrete, you know, for the upcoming decades, if that's okay with you. And so preparing for this brief talk, of course, as any good theosophist, I did a bit of research into HPB's writings, because that's what we are supposed to do, no? And so I go again into very modern style. What do? Nowadays, you take a PDF of her writings and you put in a search function, right? And then you type future generations. This is not the thing to do if you want to talk about the next decades. Because actually, when HPB is talking about the future generations, then she's usually thinking a few manvantaras ahead, not the next decades. So, well, it's interesting reading, all right, but I couldn't do very much with that. And then, of course, I wanted to keep a bit modest, not to think that what I'm about to say now will indeed count for 2,000 years. So this morning we ask ourselves the question of how to keep HPB's, that is the theosophical message, alive for future generations. Youth of today, young minds of today, are the next link towards those future generations. They are and will provide also for the carriers of the minds of tomorrow. And so the question is how to present theosophical principles and thought, practice and lifestyle to them so that they understand and embrace them. And by doing so, lay the cornerstone for a world population that knows how to live in harmony with the universal laws that govern Earth, the solar system, and universes alike. It sounds very lofty, but as we know, it also boils down to that. And indeed, such a question is worth several days of conference, as it invites to a whole series of reflections on how to make available the teachings to those future generations, starting with the younger generations, teens and twins of today. And to be able to do that, it is key to verify, firstly, what the current young generations are exposed to in terms of input of information, which is a lot. Secondly, how they learn to deal with the massive load of information they need to digest day after day, or how they fail to do so because of the extreme pressure and other factors. And thirdly, I think we also need to know what is coming our way in terms of new technologies that have the potential to further impact the way humans deal with information, even more intensively than the internet has done so far. When we look at these questions, we for sure come up with interesting elements, indicators as to the way ahead in the presentation of the Theosophy that our organizations wish to bring under the attention of today's and tomorrow's audience. I cannot help myself but to give you still a few facts and figures, of course, as some of people who hear me regularly know I do. A United Nations paper on youth and information technology, published somewhere around 2012, highlights a number of interesting data which depicts a first tension field in the life of youth today. Some highlights. Almost half the world's population is under the age of 25, and nearly a quarter are aged 12 to 24. Of that age group, nearly 40% live on less than $2 a day. Youth employment is in crisis according to the ILO, which is the International Labour Organization, which estimates that some 75 million are out of work as of 2012. That accounts for 41% of total global unemployment and is not likely to recover until beyond 2016. By the end of 2013, mobile cellular subscriptions will reach a penetration of 89% in developing countries, which figure in 2014 has already slightly increased. Internet user statistics are also surging, with 2.7 billion, that is 39% of the world population, expected to be online by the end of the year, and that figure goes for all regions, all continents in the world combined. Another study, this time by the Pew Research Center, published by Amanda Leonard, also comes up with a number of meaningful findings on youth. This time, more specifically, American youth and their relation to mobile phones and the internet, out of which I just picked a few trends at random. Fully 88% of American teens aged 13 to 17 have or have access to a mobile phone of some kind, and the vast majority of older teens, 73%, have smartphones. About a third of teens have a basic cell phone that is not a smartphone. About 15% of teens have both types of phones. Of teens with a smartphone, 21% also have a basic cell phone. On the flip side, half of teens with a basic phone also have or have access to a smartphone. And then very interesting, a typical teen sends and receives 30 texts a day. Of that same age group, 87% of American teens have or have access to a desktop or laptop computer, and 58% of teens have or have access to a tablet computer. And of that same age group, they're also going online rather frequently, aided by convenience and constant access provided by mobile phones, 92% of teens report going online daily, with 24% using the internet almost constantly, 56% going online several times a day, 12% once a day. Just 6% of teens report going online weekly, and 2% go online less often. Of course, we can be of the opinion that phones and computers are not that important, that we definitely should not lead our lives on them, that real life is happening outside of devices and outside of online life. But if a very interesting part of the audience is spending an important part of its life in front of one or other device, and we still wish to reach them, then we're probably better off to at least be present in that arena, to let them know that we exist and what we have to offer in a language that they understand. With the figures mentioned above on teens and the internet, no use to tell you that in many cases there is not so much time left to read books when you are busy sending and receiving an average of 30 texts a day. Needless also to stress what impact it has on, for instance, language, concentration, and social interaction. And in terms of impact on also the mental life of man, there are still a few more elements during the next decades, especially when we see what is coming to us in terms of advanced information technology, things like smart glasses, smart data, wireless energy transfer, brain-computer interfaces, screenless displays, smart houses, and wearable electronics. All things that are now making their way and being pushed by the marketing scene into the consumer markets of tomorrow, into our lives. You could say that finally all of this is only impacting that part of the world which can afford all these devices, and people who are exaggerating their use. But then, we would not be theosophists as to know that we, more specifically our mental carriers, do not stop where our body stops. We know very well we are actually swimming into one big emotional and mental pool, fed and made up, amongst others, by the emotional and mental components of all of us. This is at the same time the weakness and the strength of the current situation in the world. And actually the same reason why HPB could say in an encouraging note, and I quote, "Do not be afraid of your difficulties. Do not wish you could be in other circumstances than you are. For when you have made the best of an adversity, it becomes the stepping stone to a splendid opportunity." And a little further she says, "It is an occult law, moreover, that no man can rise superior to his individual failings without lifting, be it ever so little, the whole body of which he is an integral part. In the same way, no one can sin nor suffer the effects of sin alone. In reality, there is no such thing as separateness, and the nearest approach to that selfish state which the laws of life permit is in the intent or the motive. And we are in need of this type of knowledge and encouragement because we have not yet touched upon all the elements that influence the mental lives of future generations of today. With 1.2 billion youth between 15 and 24 in the world, and about 20% of them experiencing a mental health issue, the United Nations declared the theme of International Youth Day of 2014 as Youth and Mental Health. It seems that young minds of today are under serious pressure and hardly and understandably capable of handling this pressure, managing it by, amongst others, organizing moments of genuine resourcing and regeneration. In too many cases, they regrettably seem to seek relief, often held by circumstances, peers, and sometimes even influential adults via routes of escape which only lead to more trouble, isolation, and ultimately downfall, going from gameplay up to substance abuse. Some astonishing facts on the latter can be learned from the website dosomething.org. More teens die from prescription drugs than heroin and cocaine combined. Occasional or even regular substance abuse is often not considered as harmful, be it marijuana, steroids, crack, or cocaine. And it is clear that an important number of youth get the substances through prescriptions that were not intended for them. On the other hand, it was found that teens who consistently learn about the risks of drugs through their parents are up to 50% less likely to use drugs than those who don't. What are all these facts around youth, information technology and electronics, and substance abuse tell us? They only give a snapshot of the mental environment in which many young people grow up today. What do these fields have in common? And what can we learn from all this in terms of presenting theosophical teachings, practice, and lifestyle, like we said earlier, so that young people understand and embrace them? Phones and internet clearly have to do with communication and linking up with peers, with friends, albeit often in a surrogate manner. Moreover, communication nowadays goes very fast and therefore also very superficially. Substances, on the other hand, disrespectfully force one's attention toward the individual inner atmosphere and a certain type of inner experiences. Another factor that is being reported by substance abusers is the feeling of oneness or inner clarity, as the case may be. Clearly and evidently, there is a very strong appeal of these inner experiences to make so many young people force a way into their inner being, harming by doing so their subtle human constitution, sometimes beyond repair in this lifetime. Clearly also, young people wish to know, they wish to experience. What? That's what our teachings are all about. But unfortunately, many prefer the unsafe route over the safety offered by the Theosophia, the timeless wisdom as we present it, and which respects the natural course of development of any human being, actually of all life. Since HPB's time, the world and society have changed a great deal. So, for instance, we need to understand that we Theosophists are not the only ones in this world to offer bits and pieces of the timeless wisdom and some of its practices to the world. This element alone should also inspire us to the necessary modesty, but also to an awareness and of our value and position in relation to the whole of the spiritual landscape of today's world, and to our respective positions and contributions to the whole of the Theosophical movements as they developed from 1875 onwards, each with its own energy, focus, and color, embellishing the Theosophical rainbow. And despite many a critical note during our existences, the Theosophical movements always wish to provide and are recognized for thorough, acknowledgeable information on the wisdom tradition and the occult sciences, with an open mind, following as much as possible scientific investigations and progress of whatever discipline they may come, and above all, faithful to the ethical core, without which Theosophy would not be what it was, is, and always will be. We will need to push ahead with that specific mixture of reliable and well-established content on the one hand, and an attractive, alluring, dynamic, and youthful presentation on the other hand. To what end? Basically, to rekindle the spiritual flame in each, not in a superficial way. This type of rekindling is already done by many, but in the profound way that we are familiar with, not only addressing mental understanding, but genuine intuition and higher spirituality, which is not sensationalist, but which goes respectfully but straight to the heart and essence of any human being. To let each know and feel that deep down we are all searching to reconnect with our core, which is Anand, bliss and happiness. Not the happiness of which there is much talk in mainstream media, but the one to which is hinted in The Idol of the Lotus, and I quote, "There are three truths which are absolute and which cannot be lost, but yet may remain silent for lack of speech. First, the soul of man is immortal, and its future is the future of a thing whose growth and splendor has no limit. The principle which gives life dwells in us and without us, is undying and eternally beneficent, is not heard or seen or smelt, but is perceived by the man who desires perception. Each man is his own absolute lawgiver, the dispenser of glory or gloom to himself, the decreer of his life, his reward, his punishment." End of quote. The state of the world shows us very clearly there is still more than sufficient room and reason to exist for all the theosophical movements. And it cannot be excluded, as far as I'm concerned, that for some projects, a combining of strengths and forces might just be the way ahead for bringing the message to the future generations in the form they are able to assimilate and digest. And when we say making available to future generations, we definitely are no longer talking about books, nor even just video recordings of lectures alone. In the framework of what is coming to us and on how young minds are being shaped today, we better think in terms of visuals. Short and brainy 3D animated video clips illustrating the basics of man's inner subtle life. Media downloadable and playable on mobile devices, striking the keynotes of our teachings in only a few seconds. E-books for all those who do not have the time to go to a bookshop or to sit at home reading books, but who want to have access and read books wherever they are. This last way of communicating should be especially targeted to professionally active people, those who are currently raising families, bringing up their children, having jobs, and still wanting to stay in touch with the Theosophy, the profound current of wisdom, which can form the backbone of their activities during the day, and which at the end of the day, their duty done, is like a meditational balm to an often agitated mind. It might sound like sci-fi, but it isn't. Coming back specifically to the young generations, we should think in terms of trying to accomplish compulsory practical theosophy and meditation classes in schools, or even supporting those initiatives of our choice that try to channel all the young energy of today in constructive and uplifting projects. DoSomething.org was mentioned earlier, and we should also mention here the Golden Link schools in the Philippines, led by Vic Hao Chin Jr., a highly inspiring and very good example of how to guide young people towards a theosophical, a sustainable lifestyle in which respect for life, meditation, yoga, vegetarianism, balanced self-development, but also genuine social cohesion, friendship, love, and compassionate service are key. Education there is based upon a few elementary principles, of which one is that failure does not exist, or as Ralph Waldo Emerson has put it, and I quote, "Our greatest glory is not in never failing, but in rising up every time we fail." So in conclusion, dear friends, whatever the lines of action of our respective choosing, whatever common project would see the light of day, let us too be guided by the principles which we make known to the world, that our respective projects and futures have a growth and splendor with no limits but the ones we allow, that we too are our own lawgivers, and that our success in passing on the theosophical message to the future generations will be dependent mainly upon the heart and endurance with which we stand in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabine, for offering us such a specific picture of the current state and needs of youth, and also offering some very specific ideas on how to reach them for the decennia to come. Let's see what our next speaker can add to that. Our next speaker has been a member of the